When a creative work is successful, its elements may be seen as a winning formula and copied by others. This is all too common in the world of video game design. When you're investing a ton of money into a large project, broad marketability has to be taken into account. So borrowing elements from other successful games may be a good idea so that when your product releases, it already has an existing and proven marketable audience that will want to buy it and play it. The original Super Mario Bros. Caused the NES to be practically lousy with side-scrolling platformers. The game Gran Turismo practically invented the simulation driving genre, giving rise to series like Forza that still continue to this day. Halo made sure that pretty much every single first-person shooter after its release would have a two-weapon system and regenerating health. And then big open world games like Far Cry 3, Fallout 3, and Oblivion basically made absolutely sure that almost every game in the 7th generation would have to cram an open world mechanic into the game somehow. In 1997, developer Omega Force and publisher Koei made a fighting game called Sangoku Musou. And in 2000, when it was time to make its sequel, they would come up with an original formula that would attempt to take the types of large-scale battles from a real-time strategy game and put you on the front lines, playing as a commander, hacking and slashing your way through enemy army alongside your troops for control of the battlefield. When the game, localized as Dynasty Warriors 2, finally launched, this formula was a huge success, and it sort of created the subgenre of Musou or Warriors games as we know it. Omega Force and Koei Tecmo still release dozens of these games to this day, often licensing out popular IPs from other video games and anime to base them off of. In early 2016, a teaser site was put up by Type Moon with the text, "A new fate is stirring." Fans had no idea what this meant, but were eager to see what the announcement had in store for them. The announcement ended up being the next entry in the Fate Extra series, the first one since CCC in 2013. This one would be called Fate Extella, and instead of being a turn-based RPG that takes place on the fictional world of the Moon Cell, would be Type Moon's own attempt at the Musou genre. Later in the summer of that year, Xseed Games announced they were going to be licensing it and doing an English adaptation of it, and the game would have a worldwide release in November for PS4 and PlayStation Vita. The English version was delayed until January of 2017, but they did make up for it with a nice collector's edition, and later in that year we finally got a Switch port as well as a PC port as well. In spite of Nasu saying that CCC would be his last time writing a Fate scenario, he was knee-deep in Grand Order at this point and had long since put that statement behind him. He would go on to write the story for this game, and it shows. The game would combine the Musou elements with the already established visual novel elements of the Fate franchise, and take you through several routes where you played as Nero, Tamamo, and the new servant Altera, introduced in Grand Order. The visual novel elements include all of the dialogue-heavy exposition and immersion into the character you're playing as, but they decided to remove the possibility of getting a bad end from dialogue options, like you could in the previous extra games. The Japanese collector's version was called the Regalia Box. There was actually an even nicer version called the Velber Box, which I don't own. It included both the PS4 and the Vita versions together. Quite a useful feature with the game is you could actually save your game and upload the save file to cloud storage. So if you were on the go, you could upload your PS4 save file to the game and download it on the Vita version and continue playing where you left off. Keep in mind, this is also before the Switch version was released. The English Collector's Edition was simply called the Noble Phantasm Edition, and while it is nice, it does include the exact same art book as the Japanese version, this time in hardback. It also comes with some nice cards of the different servants in the game. Then finally, in early 2021, we got this monstrosity, the Fate Extella Collection Box, which includes Extella and its sequel, Extella Link. I did an unboxing of this on the channel earlier this year if you guys want to see what's inside. I played the Japanese version on the Vita when it first came out in late 2016, but went back and replayed it on the PS4 version when it came out in English, so I could actually appreciate the story. This went on to become one of my absolute favorite Type Moon works. I love this game, but sometimes I feel like I'm the only one. The game got a lukewarm reception at best from most people that played it, a lot of people picking it up just based off the Fate brand without any established knowledge of the Extra series or Musou games, except for maybe Hyrule Warriors by exception. It seems like most of the people that played it in the US hadn't played Extra, and I can't really blame them because Extra was incredibly scarce and released only on the PSP, so it wasn't nearly as accessible as Extella, which released again on the PS4, the Switch, which everybody owns, and having a Steam version of it made it a lot more accessible for people to just pick up and play on impulse. This caused an almost unanimous reaction of people to pick up the game, finish the first route, start the second route, and then stop. And most of their complaints seem to be that the gameplay is either really repetitive or the story is too confusing, or both.
It's really surprising how many people don't like this game. It's almost unanimous that if someone has finished the game, they like it, and if they haven't finished it, they don't like it. Not that I can blame them, I don't expect someone to continue playing a game that they don't enjoy, but the ones who play through the later routes of this game's story get to see the brilliance of it. Not to mention, this is one of the first works since the original Type Moon visual novels that were so iconic that actually uses the multiple routes aspect to its advantage, utilizing the medium the story is being told in as an integral element to the story itself. And I'm surprised that doesn't appeal more to die-hard old-school Type Moon fans. It's the first new Type Moon work in years to really feel like a Type Moon work.
Let's go ahead and talk about the gameplay.
I would actually argue that this game holds up remarkably well as a Musou game, and stands high as one of the better games in the genre. Part of the reason why is the organic, chaotic nature of each battle, where the game doesn't overtly hold your hand and force you to certain objectives. It just lets you approach each map as you choose to, with a few minor objectives or suggestions on behalf of the game to make things easier and more optimal. The traditional Musou format is you're leading an army for control of the map against an enemy army. Once you control enough territory, the enemy morale drops low enough to where they surrender. In Extella, this is represented by a bar at the top of the screen that shows how much territory each faction controls. This is known as the regime matrix. Each sector of the map is worth a certain amount of points on the regime matrix, and once one faction has enough points to complete the bar for their side, the battle immediately ends and victory is declared. In your case, leaving you to fight a boss servant afterwards. The enemies you face are all the same types of attack programs from Fate Extra, only this time around they all mostly have humanoid forms and wield swords. Like most Musou games, you can simply hack and slash your way through hundreds of these things without them putting so much as a single thread, because of their low aggression and damage. They're meant to be fodder enemies and show off the spectacle of how powerful these servants are. There are special types of attack programs including archers, lancers, cube throwers, and flyers. When you enter an enemy-controlled sector, you'll notice some bars on the right side of the screen that fill up once you've defeated enough attack programs. Once full, they will spawn in a more powerful attack program called an aggressor. Once all of the aggressors are defeated in a sector, you take control of it. Different aggressor types include sword wielders, axe and hammer wielders, giant brutes, and ones made of swords that are very hard to hit. These enemies pose an actually significant threat to you and are the primary units the enemy uses to send into opposing sectors to take them over. There's also a special aggressor spawner enemy called a plant that you'll need to eliminate right away to prevent more aggressors from rapidly spawning in and being sent off to your sectors. The combat consists of a light attack combo that may have 5 or 6 hits to it by pressing the square button repeatedly, but button mashing won't get you anywhere in this game. You can use a heavy attack by hitting triangle, and you can interrupt your combo at any point to perform a different and contextual finisher. So you press square one time and then hit triangle, and you'll launch an enemy into the air and be able to perform an air combo. Depending on if you hit square 2, 3, or 4 times before you hit triangle, you'll get a different and unique move for each combination, with more unlocking as your character levels up. This is highly preferable to the modern style of Musou games where you simply hold down R1 and hit one of the face buttons to do a special move on command, which totally takes the reward and the interactivity away from memorizing combos and learning the intricacies of combat. Granted, this isn't a fighting game or even a character action game like DMC, but it does have enough nuance to the combat to where calling it a button masher is disingenuous. By hitting triangle while either standing still, moving, or dashing, you'll get a unique contextual heavy attack for those different circumstances as well. You may feel inclined to spam the dashing heavy attack a lot, as it's a reliable and safe way to deal decent area of effect damage and kill multiple attack programs quickly in order to spawn in the aggressors reliably. Speaking of dashing, you can dash a near infinite amount of times in succession, which creates this unintended level of chaotic and borderline comedic fun to the movement in this game. You really do feel like a servant. You feel powerful and all of your movement is extremely quick and potent. When you double jump, your character gets an insane amount of elevation off the second jump, and you can redirect them in the air with ease. In my opinion, they absolutely nailed the movement in this game, and even though the controls do have elements of jankiness to them, I would say it's one of the most fun and satisfying Musou combat systems. As per usual with Musou games, boss fights can be a little janky as you're forced to just use the lock-on feature and awkwardly trade blows with each other, without much strategy or thought put into it. Enemy servants put up a major threat towards your control over the map, and are worth a permanent boost towards completing the regime matrix, so it's always worth it to take them out as soon as possible. You're still playing as Hakuno from Fate Extra here, and even though the combat is from the perspective of the servant, you can still provide codecasts to assist them in battle. Depending on what formalware you have equipped will give you a different codecast ability you can use, such as heal, cure poison, discover treasure, drop a decoy, increase strength or defense, or swap over to your second in command servant for each faction. For Nero, this is Archer, for Tamamo it's Karna, and for Altera it's Gilgamesh. Don't worry though, every single servant in the game is playable and have their own side story. When you defeat enemies, you also pick up install skills that you can equip in the menu before battle. These abilities can be resistance to certain types of damage, or a boost to some of your abilities, such as your Noble Phantasm, and their effectiveness could be scaled and increased by linking them together with other install skills of that same type and color. You can unlock these install slots by increasing the bond level with your servant. The main 3 servants, you can increase their bond levels through conversations in the My Room throughout the main story, but each mission has side objectives up to 5 servants can opt into and ask you to complete to increase their bond level as well. As is also common in Musou games, while on the battlefield you can break open boxes to get healing items like yakisoba bread and bento boxes for a full heal. You can also pick up sake bottles and a full pitcher of sake, which is used to increase the gauge under your health bar. This gauge is for a special move called the Extella maneuver. When you hit the circle button, you will stop time and are able to unleash a volley of concentrated attacks on a single target, followed up at the end with an AoE attack, and depending on how many notches are full on the meter, will determine on how many hits you can get in. This move can be used very strategically because you might be inclined to dump all of your gauge into a single target like a tough aggressor or a servant, or you might just want to tap it one time in order to get off the AoE attack and kill all the attack programs spawned in around you, speeding up the process of spawning in the aggressors when you're behind the 8-ball in time. Another item you can pick up is a cipher key-like item called the Phantasm Key. There are only 3 of these on every map, and once you have all 3 of them, you can use your Noble Phantasm. Only the significant storyline servants can use their Noble Phantasm against you, and that's assuming you don't just whack them while they're charging it up and take their Phantasm Key from them. All servants, however, can use the Moon Drive gauge, a temporary superpower mode that significantly increases your attack and defense. The servants who wield the Regalia, namely Nero and Tamamo, can do a special type of Moon Drive called Moon Crux, where they use the Regalia to transform into a new and more powerful combat mode.
It's typical for me that if I really enjoy a game, I'm going to want to play around with the harder difficulty levels and see what the game has to offer. So I decided to record the footage for this video. I was going to stream the game on the very hardest difficulty level and try to go for the Platinum Trophy. Not something I typically do with PlayStation games at all. I think the only other one I've done this for is Valkyria Chronicles, which will probably get its own video in the future.
Essentially, the biggest changes that have been made to the hardest difficulty are pretty standard for most games: increased enemy health, increased enemy damage, and highly more aggressive AI. AI servants will fire off their Moon Drive like it's going out of style, causing boss fights to drag out much longer than they normally would, as you're forced to go on the defensive often. The biggest change to the hardest difficulty is now every single map is positively lousy with sector traps. Occasionally when you enter an enemy-occupied sector, you may get a warning of a trap that will detonate and deal intense elemental damage to you. These can often catch you off guard, resulting in an unavoidable death. Even early maps in this game are now filled to the brim with these things on very hard mode, so you'll need to view the map and adjust your codecast setup to make sure you have an elemental resistance equipped that you can cast to the corresponding element of the sector trap. If you do manage to take a death, however, the game does give you a very forgiving backup plan in the form of being able to use one of your command seals to revive your servant. You also have the option of using all 3 command seals to order your servant to go all out, which results in a full revive and a full moondrive gauge as well. But if your servant dies this time around and you have no command seals left, that's game over.
As for getting the Platinum Trophy, boy, I thought this was going to be easy, but it sure threw a curveball at me at the last minute. When you finish the game and you've cleared all of the main story and the side stories, there should only be a couple of trophies left you have to get, but some of those can be incredibly time-consuming and incredibly challenging to get.
First is unlocking Artoria. She's not relevant to the main story and is just here as a fun bonus character and because she's the poster child of the series. Unlocking her requires going to a specific map in each route, completing the regime matrix, and then picking up 5 yakisoba bread items in a specific sector, all while the currently spawned in boss doesn't show up to kick your ass. If this sounds incredibly convoluted, this is the patched version of how to do it. The requirements on the Japanese version were changed with the English version's Day 1 patch, which was to do all of this while the clock on your PS4 or Vita was set to a certain time of day.
Next is completing every single stage on very hard mode and increasing 3 of your servants' bond levels up to the max level of 30. I got this one pretty easy, barring a little bit of grinding. Nero, Altera, Karna, and Artoria pretty much reached level 30 about side by side with each other. The real son of a bitch trophy in this game is the 100% completion in the gallery. This one requires you to buy every single formal wear and codecast in the game for every single servant and get every single dialogue conversation in the game in the main story, some of which are missable. Now, I simply thought, okay, easy enough. After I'm done playing through the game on very hard mode, I'll have enough QP to purchase every single codecast I don't already have. The problem is, when you're shopping for codecasts, you don't know which ones you already own. So I thought, okay, I'll upload my save file to file storage, I'll open my gallery on the Vita version with the PS4 version with the shop open on my TV, and I'll just buy whichever ones I'm missing. Then the problem occurred that I noticed there were some that I was missing that were not available for purchase. So I looked it up, and evidently there is a mystic code for every single servant that you unlock that allows you to do a servant swap ability into that servant in free play mode for any character in any mission, which is pretty cool. Problem with that is those are unlockable for reaching that specific servant's bond level at max level of 30. Meaning, to get 100% completion in the gallery and therefore the Platinum Trophy, you don't just have to increase one servant's level to 30 or even 3. You have to increase every single servant in the game to bond level 30. Have fun with that. Good lord, I got sidetracked there. Let's talk about the elements of the production quality that actually matter, like the graphics and the sound.
I hear lots of people complain about the visuals in this game, calling them dated, and granted, they are very simple. I feel like this was a game designed with very simple assets for easy cross-platform compatibility between the PS4 and Vita versions. The game is well optimized for both systems and looks really good on the Vita. The only difference being the PS4 has 60 FPS and much larger density of enemy programs on screen, which does make it a little bit more satisfying to play. But the Vita version compensates for this in a way that makes these additional attack programs on screen on the console version nothing more than a visual upgrade rather than a tangible difference in gameplay. The character portraits look excellent and are much nicer and more charming than the ones in Extra, and I feel like the 3D models look nice as well. They're just very simple and don't move much during cutscenes. They definitely didn't want to spend any extra time or money on rigging complex animations for cinematics, not that I can blame them there. The sound design is solid overall as well, using some very satisfying menu sounds and audio cues in battle. The real outstanding feature of the sound design is, to no one's surprise, the soundtrack. I always felt like this soundtrack had a certain character to it that felt very traditionally Fate. It sounds like a Fate OST should sound and uses some of the same instruments and styles.
Upon further research, I found out that the composer for this game, Daisuke Nagata, under the pseudonym James Harris is a long-running composer for the Fate series and all their visual novels. So it shouldn't surprise me that this game's soundtrack reminds me of the Rialto Nua soundtrack when it was made by the same guy. The standalone CD album for the game's soundtrack didn't release until December of 2018, which is a little unfortunate, but it was well worth the wait. This soundtrack has become one of my absolute favorite soundtracks in the entire series, and is up there with the Rialto Nua and Zero soundtracks. Some of the atmospheric tracks from the game are actually missing from this standalone CD album, and that's because they were actually ported over from the CCC soundtrack. Listening to the standalone CD album version is highly preferable to listening to it in the game's own built-in soundtrack player, because you get the actual uncut versions of the tracks that have like the proper opening and the proper outro, and they don't loop in the same way they do in the game. As much as I've praised these other elements though, as expected, the standout feature of this game is its story.
We're going to be playing as the female version of the protagonist here, as I feel like it works slightly better for the story, and we're going to be naming them Hakano Kishinami, the canon name of the Fate Extra protagonist. Our story begins immediately after Fate Extra's conclusion, with our protagonist Hakano Kishinami traveling to the Moon Cell's core after being declared the winner of the Moon Cell Holy Grail War. She encounters a massive creature, enshrouded in darkness with piercing red eyes. A mysterious man tells her that this shadowy monster must be destroyed, for that is our purpose. The giant monster clearly does not belong inside of Seraph. It's not a servant, a mage, or a program. It reaches out to Hakano, threatening to engulf her entirely. Just as Hakano had resigned to her fate, she draws upon the willpower and motivation to survive from deep within her mind, body, and soul. And suddenly, she hears the familiar voice of two female servants, and the darkness shatters like a bad dream. We awaken in the comfort of a beautiful servant with emerald eyes and a flowing red dress. We take comfort in her presence, as she was the one who guided us and protected us through so many battles in the Moon Cell's Holy Grail War, but our memories are muddled, and we can't quite make out her name. Nero, not being one to waste an opportunity to boast and stroke her own ego, proudly reintroduces herself to us with glorious theatrics. With that out of the way, we finally get to take a look around and figure out just exactly where the hell we are. After the events of Fate Extra, you and Nero are essentially crowned the Supreme Sovereign of Seraph, meaning that Nero now has the ability to sculpt and cultivate her own realm and domain within Seraph, called Mere Aurum, the capital of roses. She takes us back to the My Room domain, and the concept here is very much the same as it was in Fate Extra. This is where you get to talk to your servant and increase their bond level, and learn a lot more about them from these optional conversations, as well as adjust your setup before going into battle. Hakano has a bit of amnesia due to the events of the beginning of the game, so this scene serves as a perfect and less contrived way to offer up exposition for first-time players of the Extra series. Nero also explains to us the tangible prize she won from the Holy Grail War, the Regalia, a ring that symbolizes her victory and supreme sovereignty over Seraph. After our first bond conversation, we decide to get some rest. The following morning, Nero takes us back to the throne room to introduce us to her harem of loyal servants that make up the generals that serve her here in the capital of roses.
Yeah, they're all dudes. She would not trust any women in her ranks at all. Behold, my men-at-arms! These 4 warriors will proclaim my sovereignty throughout the Moon Cell!
Each of the servants she has selected already have a prior history with her, in addition to offering a particular tactical benefit. Cuchulainn was Rin's servant in the Moon Cell Holy Grail War, and depending on which route you picked, you may have had to fight him. Li Shuen was one of the most treacherous and dangerous of all the servants, so it makes sense to summon him on our side to eliminate him as a potential enemy. He's certainly the closest to an evil alignment of any of Nero's team. Sir Gawain of the Knights of the Round was certainly the most formidable opponent Nero faced, and garnered the most respect from her. Then finally there's Archer, who Nero doesn't seem to remember, but Extella has sort of canonized Archer's role in Fate Extra as sort of a enigmatic support role that would show up every once in a while to help out Hakuno. Nero finds him familiar, but doesn't know his true identity. No one in the Moon Cell will technically ever know.
I really do enjoy Archer here in the extra games because he gets to exist outside of his ideological hang-ups, and we really get to see him flex his skills with tactical assessment and strategizing by putting him in different situations.
Nero takes us out into our new world, still under construction, initially just so she can show us around this domain we have claimed for ourselves. But suddenly, enemy attack programs and the presence of an enemy servant make itself known. With the threat of combat looming over us, we find ourselves confounded as to how we're going to aid Nero in battle rather than being a burden. Nero outstretches her hand and suddenly our Spiritron body dematerializes into the ring and we find ourselves inside the regalia itself. From here we can properly offer Nero a support role and our first battle begins. The first sector the game starts us in is deceptively time-consuming as the game wants you to practice around with the mechanics for a bit before allowing you to proceed too far, meaning it takes a while for the aggressors to spawn in here and you're locked in from transitioning to other sectors. Once the sector is cleared, the stage is completely open-ended, but designed with enough visual cues that will guide you linearly across the northeast side of the map to a sector where you meet up with Cuchulainn. While helping him clear out his sector, the two of you notice the unmistakable sound of idle music. When we transition south to the sector occupied by a plant-type enemy, we see Elizabeth Bathory putting on a concert.
I love the version of the scene in Ku's side story because he's basically just like, oh, what is that racket? Get her out of here! And he just shows up and just blasts away all these attack programs that are just like, I guess supposed to be like rooting for her.
Thanks to the plant enemy, this is the first sector with any enemy challenge or variety, assuming you have followed the map as the game intends you to. You'll conquer this sector and complete the regime matrix while being adjacent to the sector that Elizabeth spawns in, perfectly wrapping up this map. Our first boss battle against Elizabeth is not particularly challenging, but even for this first boss, she is surprisingly tanky and durable. She can take a lot of hits. She has a few dangerous attacks, including a spinning attack with her spear, and a heart-shaped projectile that could potentially bring you to critical health on the hardest difficulty. After beating her into submission, she runs away and leaves us to recover. Nero spends a moment fawning over the concept of us touching her fingers when we suddenly feel a sharp and sudden pain. Nero wants to evacuate us back to my room, but we're interrupted by a familiar voice. Tamamo comes strutting in, flaunting her ego and declaring her supremacy. Nero is initially shocked to see that Tamamo is even still here and alive to begin with, but then notices that not only does she have her own ring, her own regalia, but what appears to be her own Hakuno, an exact copy of us. This literal out-of-body experience has Hakuno paralyzed by a sudden painful sensation. Tamamo's declaration of war has evidently gone somewhat unnoticed by Nero, as with her own army of servants, they've already taken over 50% of Seraph's neutral territories, and she makes it clear that she plans to take the rest. After they leave, Nero evacuates the still paralyzed Hakuno, and they recover in her quarters. The first My Room conversation after this offers the option for the player to get some more exposition about the regalia, but also begins the rampant fan service found in this game, Nero taking note of Hakuno's more passionate and straightforward behavior towards her, as it's slightly uncharacteristic of how Hakuno acted before she woke up. After we rest, Nero performs a scan to validate Tamamo's claim that she's taken half of Seraph's territories, and confirms it to be true. Not a moment later, we have an unexpected guess, a caster class servant, and a brand new and unique one to this game.
Introducing Archimedes, a brand new servant only in Extella and not even in Fate Grand Order. His role in this story is sort of as a systems admin slash antivirus software for the Moon Cell. When I saw they were going to put Archimedes in this game, I was pretty excited because from a historical standpoint, I think he's a great choice for a servant, and I thought his design and his character portrayal was excellent. I was just anxious to see if they were going to put the Archimedes death ray from Mythbusters in the game as his noble phantasm.
Nero recognizes Archimedes' name as she holds it in high regard. He informs us that he is in the process of performing a systems update for Seraph. This update, that is said to occur once every 14,000 years, has began in an incomplete, asymmetrical manner, thanks to the fact that the Regalia's ownership is being split between Nero and Tamamo. He tells us that the event that took place at the beginning of the game in the Moon Cell core had to have been the catalyst that split the Regalia and Hakuno herself, for Archimedes was there to witness it. One of his skills allows him to discern what is wrong with us, saying that Hakuno only exists as her mind, and that her soul exists separately in Tamamo's possession, and without that soul, the mind will eventually fade away. The stakes are now unbelievably dire, and our objective is clear. We must defeat Tamamo and reunite the Regalia, to restore Seraph and ourself. On to Map 2. Every sector in this map is a reference to Fuyuki from the mainline Fate's Day Night timeline. One sector is the docks where Saber and Lancer fought in Fate Zero, another is the school rooftop, while another is the Ryudo Temple. The sector we initially start in is blockaded by powerful aggressors. The game forces you to use the Moon Drive here to blow through them, and we get to see Nero's Moon Crux transformation for the first time. It wouldn't be a Fate's Day Night reference if it wasn't for a Medusa fight. She's the boss of this stage, and right away she deploys the Bloodfort Andromeda just like in Fate's Day Night. Instead of acting like a mass debuff and an energy siphon, it acts as a buff for Tamamo's Berserker, the reoccurring Lu Bu from Fate Extra.
This introduces us to the mechanic of superpowered servants. They often show up in certain maps with specific objectives, and that red glow around them means they can deal extreme damage to you and do not stagger from regular attacks. Apparently there is an option in the menu to just disable the superpowered servants, and I've never played with that because it feels like cheating, but it is there if you wanted to take advantage of that.
Taking on Lu Bu in a straight fight while he's superpowered is practically suicide. We first need to take control of the sectors anchoring the Blood Fort in place in order to have a fighting chance against him. I start by taking the sector that Ku is engaged in so that Lu Bu will transition into it. That way we can take the sector he was previously in and stall for time. With that sector down, we take the one in the upper corner based on the school rooftops, with some awkward aggressor spawns due to the 2 levels of elevation here. Then we take the Ryudo Temple, and the Blood Fort falls. Lu Bu hits extremely hard, as expected for the only Berserker in the game, but if you've managed to keep Li Shuen alive at this point, once he falls, you should complete the Regime Matrix. All 3 of the Phantasm keys are on the left side of the map, so you may have to go out of your way and quickly grab those before the sector traps fire off in those areas, but Medusa spawns in a sector that is already occupied by you. Ku helps you gang up on her, and if you have a full Moon Drive, you should be able to beat her into submission with incredible ease. After returning to your quarters for some rest, Nero wakes you to check on your condition. She starts fawning over you as per usual when you're suddenly interrupted by a vision. A vision of a servant with white hair, dark skin, and red eyes. A beautiful warrior woman. She tells you that her gaze has her entranced, paralyzed, but if you were ever to betray her, she would destroy you. Nero expresses her concern for us, but can't hold herself back from airing her annoying jealousy at us. After we regroup in the throne room, Archimedes tells us we have successfully pushed back Tamamo into a corner and now control 70% of Seraph's territories. The only thing left to do is conquer Tamamo's main domain. Gawain advises us that Tamamo has an incredibly strong servant on her team with an affinity for the sun like he does. When we arrive in the Cherry Blossom capital, we're met with Tamamo and her Hakuno right away. The 2 servants bicker back and forth for a minute, but we ultimately call Tamamo's bluff and begin our 3rd battle. This map can be pretty challenging on the hardest difficulty or for new players. Losing sectors to the enemy team to have to reclaim them back later is a common nuisance. When we approach the high-value sector up ahead, we get locked in and are forced to fight Elizabeth and cannot leave the sector until we do. Once we clear that, we see on the minimap another sector occupied by a servant. Once we enter, we're locked in again and have to face Tamamo's most powerful ally, Karna from Apocrypha, returning from CCC. In terms of lore, he's the strongest servant on her team, but in terms of gameplay, he's pretty slow and has some high-power AoE attacks, but other than that, he shouldn't be too much trouble to take out even on the hardest difficulty. Throughout this map, you'll secede territory to Tamamo's forces, but once all of her servants on the map have been defeated, you'll have such a massive point advantage that you'll take it all back and complete the regime matrix very quickly. This time though, since we're in Tamamo's main home territory, instead of her just spawning in on the map somewhere, there's a special portal that appears to teleport us directly into her throne room chamber. Tamamo herself is going to be a lot tougher. Servants on the hardest difficulty spam their moon drive, and when Tamamo does it, since she also controls the regalia, she'll do her own version of the Moon Crux form change, which deals some of the greatest damage of any attacks in the game. You may take a death or two from a stray ice crystal here or there while waiting for her gauge to whittle down. When Tamamo tries to use her Noble Phantasm, we'll beat the Phantasm key right off of her and fire off our own Noble Phantasm, finishing her off. Tamamo laments not being able to match Nero's power, but just as we're about to finish her off, her Hakuno, the Soul, steps forward to defend her. Initially, we're shocked to see this, but knowing that this Hakuno is well and truly the Hakuno's soul, we know that we would do the same thing if it was Nero in danger too. Archimedes attempts to snap us out of our moment of pity for Tamamo to remind us of our responsibility to reunite the regalia and Hakuno's mind and soul. Unfortunately, allowing Nero to be distracted was a critical mistake, as Elizabeth swoops in and steals Tamamo's regalia.
There's no easy way to say this, but Elizabeth Bathory is profoundly annoying and incredibly irritating and spends the entire game being a nuisance and distracting us from the main story. She does make up for it towards the end, and we'll get to that when we get to that. Just trust me on that.
Dark Ellie, as she wants to be known now, attempts to don the ring for herself, but it refuses to accept her and does not grant her the royal authority she seeks. It rejects her, resulting in the mana in the regalia overflowing and self-destructing. With Tamamo's regalia destroyed, she decides she has no fighting chance anymore. She takes her husband, the Soul Hakuno, and escapes with her.
I don't want to jump ahead and get into spoilers quite yet, but those of you that have played the game, if you go back and replay this route, you know that at exactly this moment, this timeline is irrevocably screwed. With the destruction of Tamamo's regalia, plus Tamamo taking the Soul Hakuno into hiding with her, means that our protagonist is doomed to a horrible fate.
Archimedes is panicking, knowing that his objective has failed. Little do we know that things are about to get much, much worse. The very sky itself shatters open, revealing a dark, empty abyss. Out of it comes a warrior woman, white hair, dark skin, red eyes. The one we saw in our vision.
Oh, I'm sorry, I got a little distracted there.
The Maiden in White commands an army of twisted and warped attack programs from beyond the void, called anti-cells. This swarm rains down on Archimedes and consumes him whole. With a swing of her sword, all of the constructed data space made by Tamamo's regalia around us is reduced to rubble. In that moment, we realize that deep within our broken, fragmented memories, we do know her name. Altera, the Scourge of the Gods. Just before Altera can finish us off, another being emerges from the void with a familiar voice. Our voice. Yet another Hakuno Kishinami. Yet another regalia belongs to Altera. Meaning rather than two, there are three. The Hakuno in green is undoubtedly, unquestionably loyal to Altera, but nonetheless, she tries to quell her anger and subdue her rage. Unable to keep her back any longer, we take this opportunity to escape.
We regroup to discover Archimedes still intact. He tells us that in the time it took for us to rest, Altera's forces, led by extremely powerful top-class servants, have succeeded in taking over a majority of Seraph already, putting us back at square one. But luckily, with the existence of this third regalia, we can still potentially restore the royal authority and fix all of this.
After a Bond conversation where we get naked with Nero in a hot spring, we set out for Mare Origo, the stormy sea palace, to take on Altera's forces. Right away you'll notice that the sector we transition to confront Altera in a cutscene is a blatant reference to the Three Kings banquet scene from Fate Zero. The same courtyard accompanied by barrels flowing out a river of wine. Very fitting considering who we're going to be fighting here. Altera spawns in the aggressors in this sector for us, so we beat them into submission before heading up the middle of the map to a small enclosed sector. This one can be a real bitch because of the floating enemies that can stun lock you with lightning attacks. Best to fire off the Extella maneuver to get that AoE attack and get rid of them right away. The gimmick with this map is you have a superpowered version of none other than Iskander from Fate Zero running around the map causing chaos. Every time you knock his health low enough, he retreats and spawns in again a few moments later in another sector. If you meet him in each of the sectors he spawns in and beat him back, eventually you'll beat him back permanently without losing any of your territory and having to retake it. Unfortunately, the way the sector point values work on this map may mean you have to burn some time towards the end capturing a sector worth only 1 point, but overall this map isn't too difficult. We arrive back in the center of the map just in time to fight this map's boss servant, Jeanne d'Arc. She's actually one of the weakest and easiest servants to beat in the game. She has very slow attacks and not a lot of defense. After beating her back, we're confronted by Altera, who ponders at how it was at all possible that Nero was able to beat Iskander. Nero basically hand-waves Altera's assessment away, saying that stats don't matter when you have the power of love.
Altera says that destruction is her duty, not her passion. Not only does she feel obligated to destroy because she was born into it, but she doesn't really understand the concept of passion at all.
Elizabeth shows up and starts to make references to Altera's legend that only Altera would know about. Altera promptly leaves, and Elizabeth gives us the "What, you mean you don't already know about this?" speech. She tells us that 14,000 years ago, Velber passed by Earth. From it came the White Titan, which exterminated every civilization on the planet. Strangely, we've seen these events. They played to us in some sort of phantom memory in a flashback at the beginning of the game.
We won't really know much about Velber and the White Titan until much later in the story.
When we regroup with Archimedes, he informs us that it is our responsibility as the owner of the regalia to stop Velber and protect the world, for that is the purpose of the regalia, and if we fail to stop Altera, it will be certain destruction for the rest of Earth and civilization. Or whatever's left of civilization in this post-apocalyptic future. Velber, the Umbral Star. It passes through our system every 14,000 years, consuming and destroying all in its path. The next scene gives us an opportunity to have Archimedes explain everything about Velber and its relationship to the Moon Cell. But I'm going to try to sum all of it up in one scene in this video, so I don't have to go over it again and again, and I minimize redundancies as we go through each route and learn about it piece by piece. As we're getting ready to set off for Mare Carcer, the Titan's dark tomb, Altera just straight up appears right in our room to fight us again. Her and Nero squabble for a bit, but Altera laments that this is the third opportunity she's had to destroy us and for some reason continues to hesitate. Hakuno points out that it's like Altera is taking joy in fighting us, and wears that happiness on her face. She's gonna be so there like, me? Smile? I wouldn't smile for anything. Must be stoic and angry all the time. Altera denounces feeling any joy, saying she has never smiled, not once, not ever. She is so taken aback by this claim that she literally leaves to go look in a mirror to make sure it's not true. Finally, we can move on to Altera's home territory in the Zero Dark and take the fight to her. We're finally introduced to Altera's third top servant, Gilgamesh. He's running around the battlefield in a superpower, terrorizing our sectors just like Iskander did in the previous map. We have to knock his health down in each one to get him to teleport out and give us a brief reprieve. Doing so, we'll have an opportunity to take out Iskander in a close sector to where we spawn. Good idea to get him out of the way early and get some points in our favor. Next we can move up to where Gilgamesh is. On the hardest difficulty we may lose a sector to him due to how long it will take to beat Iskander, but as long as he's been fought in each of the sectors he appears in, he can be permanently taken out and we can gain those points for our side. Two things about this map that can be really annoying. It's so dark and colorless that it's hard to tell exactly where you can go and where you can't, and sometimes you get stuck behind walls trying to find the exit to a given sector. And these damn sword aggressors, holy crap, these things are annoying. Only airborne attacks really work on them, since if you try to attack them from the ground, they'll just block it with their sword arms. If taking out Iskander takes too long, you may just want to leave him for a minute to go save Gawain from Gilgamesh, because losing him here would be a major setback. Meanwhile, Jeanne is attempting in vain to take over one of our sectors, but she is really squishy and easy to take out. In this session, funny enough, the instant that we defeated Jeanne, Gilgamesh transitioned into that same sector and killed my defending aggressor, so I had to push back Gil and take back the sector all over again. Once we complete the regime matrix, it's time for our final decisive battle against Altera. Altera finally reveals her identity to us, and Nero finally realizes why she recognizes her. Her identity as a heroic spirit is none other than Attila the Hun, who destroyed Western Rome. A proud heroic spirit to be sure, but there's still so much enigma surrounding her. Why does she call herself Altera? Why does she carry the sword of the Roman god of war, Mars? And how come she's in allegiance with Velber, which threatens all of humanity? The boss fight against Altera can be pretty tough, especially on the hardest difficulty. She has a few attacks that can nearly one-shot you, and like most servant fights on this difficulty, she's very trigger-happy with her Moon Drive and Noble Phantasm. Hopefully you still have all of your healing code casts saved up, as well as your command seals in case you take a death. After you've beaten her, she begins charging her Noble Phantasm. The Sword of Mars fires off a deadly beam of light from the sky, the Teardrop Photon Ray. With a smirk on her face, Altera is certain once the dust settles there will be nothing left of Nero, and that her victory is certain. Only to find Nero having used the Regalia's energy in a defensive formation to block the attack. Now Nero unleashes her own Noble Phantasm, the Domus Aurea. Her golden theater has Altera enraptured, paralyzed by its beauty. With that, Nero finally has an opportunity to knock her back on her ass.
See, there was some humanity in Altera after all. She perceived Nero as some tyrannical glutton who indulged in all manner of earthly pleasures, passions, and love. Someone who could understand true joy and therefore true beauty. Deep down, Altera was jealous. When being forced to face Nero's golden theater, it was like being forced to face that mirror and reflecting on those desires within herself.
Altera's Hakuno emerges from the Regalia. She goes to her side to comfort her and to congratulate her on a well-fought battle. Nero, taking pity on Altera, offers her a place as one of her subjects after she reunites the two Hakuno and the two pieces of the Regalia. Altera almost looks like she wants to take her up on the offer, but not before Archimedes comes strolling in to interrupt. He's baffled by how we were able to defeat Altera in the first place, insisting that it should have been impossible for us to do so. He goes on to say that offering Altera a home would be endearing, but foolish. At last Archimedes reveals his true intentions to us. He has been corrupted by Velber, by the Umbral Star.
Technically, everything that Archimedes has told us up to this point has been objectively true. He just can't help his impulses due to his corruption to help the Umbral Star. So he's working to destroy the Regalia and destroy us by extension so that the moon and therefore the earth will fall.
Archimedes uses an ability I can only assume was bestowed upon him by the Umbral Star and invokes the true nature of Altera. The true name of the Umbral Star, Sephir. Altera's body tattoo called the Star Sign reacts and she begins to transform. the massive, unholy, unearthly monstrosity awakens. The White Titan, Zephyr. The same White Titan that destroyed the world 14,000 years ago. Hakuno remembers this beast from the encounter at the Mooncell core. She knows that she saw this alien creature the moment she split into 3 pieces. Nero saves us from being crushed and puts us back into the Regalia. Nero is weak from having just beaten Altera and pushing back Archimedes. But there still could be a chance that we can destroy this monstrosity before it reaches full power. This powerful creature is emanating waves of destruction all around it. For the body of Hakuno to even be close to it, we know she's breaking down and dying. We have to stop this Titan and save her. And so begins the final boss of the Flame Poem arc. She does have a pretty nasty series of attacks, but they're highly telegraphed and easy to dodge. Once she places her hand on the ground, you'll be able to hit the Konami orbs, or Konami cubes in this case, I guess. Once you destroy them, her main core is exposed. Unfortunately, it only takes damage from your Moon Crux until you've destroyed her defense system. Repeat the cycle until you finish her off with your Noble Phantasm. Once the battle is over, the Titan becomes calm. As her body begins to crumble, she reaches her hand out to the body of Hakuno and tells her she's sorry. The body of Hakuno, having accepted her fate, allows the torrent of inorganic debris to take her away, and she dies. We attempt to call out to her to stop her, but we understand why she's made the decision, and there's nothing we can do. Archimedes acknowledges the disaster that we've created here. Thankfully, the Mooncell is safe from Velber. Without Zephyr, it will not be able to find Earth, he says. But unfortunately for us, without a body for the mind of Hakuno to inhabit, she's running on a very limited time. Archimedes mutters some nonsense about sliding and a quantum time lock, and then leaves us, calling it a loss for us. Hakuno can feel herself slipping away, and finally collapses. The Flame Poem arc ends with Nero looking up at her empty, comatose praetor, telling her how she will awaken soon, and that the Regalia has been restored and Nero's royal authority with it, that soon everything will be alright. But I think the truth of this ending is that Hakuno is gone, and Nero is in denial, unable to cope with the loss of her beloved.
Man, talk about a bleak, cold, and hopeless ending. Typical Nasu for you. But just keep in mind, we're only one route down, and we've got several more to go. So take a quick bathroom break, get yourself some tea, and get ready for Tamamo's route, the Orchid Worlds Arc.
We awaken from a bad dream in a city of flowers. Our memory is a jumbled mess. We can remember the Holy Grail War, but we can't remember our own servant. We recognize Elizabeth Bathory as she cleans the traditional Japanese palace we've found ourselves in. Elizabeth warns us about this realm's malevolent ruler, and not a moment later does the woman in question appear. A woman with golden eyes and pink hair. We approach her throne to see this vixen staring into us with piercing eyes, threatening to eat us. We simply call out Tamamo for playing this stupid game, and she drops the facade, returning to her normal, playful, affectionate self. Tamamo shows us around the Millennium Capital, expressing proudly that this is her domain, her kingdom to rule over and change as she sees fit, but we sit right beside her in this rulership as her partner. At first glance, Elizabeth seems to be one of her loyal subjects, a servant on her team. But it's obvious that she doesn't particularly enjoy the concept, as Tamamo demands that she introduce her with fantastical theatrics.
Hakuno's memories here are once again fragmented and incomplete. She initially only recognizes Tamamo through some primordial instinctual feeling and doesn't really remember anything else.
Tamamo's celebration of the mere act of Hakuno waking up is interrupted by a guest, Archimedes. Interestingly enough, Soul Hakuno remembers exactly who Archimedes is, and that they travel to the Mooncell core together. What exactly happened in the core to split us up like this? Tamamo gives Archimedes a shrewd glare. He reassures her that he's only here to remind her of her obligations as supreme ruler of Seraph, to eliminate any anomalies still remaining in the undiscovered regions. Even Hakuno agrees with Archimedes, but Tamamo just kinda shrugs off the idea of being obligated to do anything, saying she doesn't really care what happens one way or another to Seraph. She just wants to be happy with her beloved Hakuno. Elizabeth casts her doubts on Tamamo, and Tamamo responds by frying her with a thunder spell.
Tamamo's behavior here is downright terrifying. She acts like a malevolent dictator and dismisses any concern for the greater good. Hakuno has to remind herself that technically she signed up for this. She knew of Tamamo's anti-hero nature even back during the Mooncell Holy Grail War, but chose to love and accept her anyway in spite of her flaws.
At last, we're interrupted by an invading servant trying to attack the Millennium Capital. So it's time for Tamamo to ready her troops and deploy them for battle. First up is Medusa, making her debut appearance in the Extra series. She was simply a solo server with no prior allegiance that Tamamo simply recruited over a tea date.
Can somebody draw this? Can we get fan art of that? Because that just sounds amazing. I want to see that.
Next up is Lu Bu, the only berserker in the game. His inclusion makes sense based off of Fate Extra in the same way that Ku does for Nero. Rounding off the team is the real MVP, the Lancer class Karna, a literal demigod. He is easily the strongest servant in her ranks, the only one with a morally good alignment, and the staple that really keeps the rest of their team cohesive and together. With the introductions out of the way, Tamamo takes us to her version of My Room, where we can adjust our setup and get ready for the upcoming battle. Most of her Bond conversations here are pervasively horny, but we'll get to that. This one is more exposition for the time being. When we begin the first battle, Hakuno hesitates as Tamamo is just strolling out onto the battlefield. The enemy is an assassin class, Li Shuen. Why not have your 4 servants go deal with him rather than put yourself at a disadvantage? Tamamo insists that she wants to show us the power of the regalia, and that she's confident she can easily dispatch him. Hakuno is very blunt and to the point, demanding that Tamamo retreat to the throne room. But what does she do? Rather than compromise with her partner, she forces Hakuno inside the regalia against her will and without her consent.
It may seem like this scene is here to introduce Soul Hakuno to the functionality of the regalia, but in actuality this scene is very important to the character arc in Tamamo's route. She did something you absolutely do not do in a trusting relationship. She completely betrayed her partner's trust and disregarded their consent. Something else to note here that's sort of lost in the translation to English is the characterizations of the different Hakunos that have their personalities split across the 3 different ones. The Mind Hakuno is very emotionally aware and very passionate, and Nero recognizes this as being uncharacteristic of her. The Soul Hakuno is a little bit more emotionally detached, which Tamamo regards as uncharacteristic. But the Soul Hakuno remains to be blunt and honest and demands a certain rationality out of Tamamo.
Now we get to the first Tamamo combat section, and it's sad to say this, but this is the part of the game where a lot of players put it down. Tamamo does not play nearly as well as Nero, making this route significantly more difficult, not through any challenge the game is throwing at you, but due to Tamamo's own ineptitude at dealing with threats quickly. You just don't gain the same level of momentum as you do as Nero, because things just take too long. Her first map is the same as the third map in the Flame Poem arc, and just like in that route, this map can be tricky and you can easily lose territory and have to reclaim it back. Thankfully, there are plenty of servants you can take out to balance the point values in your favor. We start out by going down the center to take on our far biggest threat on this map, Gawain. Gawain is insanely difficult. I had to take a break from streaming this just to make sure I did enough level grinding to get Tamamo up to level 51 just for this fight. Everything Gawain does hurts like hell. He blocks everything you do, and if you use Tamamo's flame attack or tornado attack, it hits on multiple frames, and each one is an opportunity for him to parry you and send you flying. If you beat up enough attack programs to get your moon drive gauge enough, you can beat Gawain down with that if you feel the need. Next, I try to take the sector to the southwest to prevent the planet from sending more enemies into my sectors. While doing so, Elizabeth gets her ass killed by a regular aggressor. God, she's useless. The worst part of this map is these goddamn hammer aggressors. They take forever to kill. Archer is over here trying to take back the same sector we just fought Gawain in, so it's time to take him out. In general, he's much easier to kill than Gawain, but I'm not exactly taking my chances, so I decided to use Tamamo's Mooncrux on him. Next, I'm taking the sector worth 3 and 4 points respectively to complete the Regime Matrix. For a more in-depth explanation of Tamamo's moveset, be sure to watch the re-upload of the live streams from this map. But at this high level, we really want to abuse the Ice Crystal attack, as it does the most damage and has the best spread for hitting multiple strong targets. The Li Xuan fight is actually pretty easy, especially compared to Gawain. We use our Mooncrux yet again to knock him down to size and finish him off with our Noble Phantasm. When the dust settles, we revel at Tamamo's power. Still not a justification for her breach of our trust, but we'll properly address that later in the game. Tamamo celebrates her victory, swooning over the intimacy of trapping Hakuno in the regalia. But before she can jump our bones, we're interrupted by another interloper. Interestingly enough, Soul Hakuno recognizes Nero right away. Tamamo is disgusted by the sight of Nero, saying that the two of them were aiding Hakuno together during the Moonstone Holy Grail War, but Nero betrayed her at the last minute, and she still hasn't forgiven her. Soul Hakuno is deeply shocked at the appearance of Mind Hakuno, but doesn't suffer the same world-shattering mind break at the mere sight of her, which is interesting. Soul Hakuno goes on to explain that it must be because the mind controls passion and emotions, while the soul controls the existence of true nature and instinct. Whatever that means. That must have been the best way the localization team thought they could put it. Nero and Tamamo squabble for a bit and trade blows, but ultimately it ends in Nero leaving and Tamamo swearing her vengeance upon her. When we return home, Tamamo expresses her concern for our needs, safety, and well-being. We're admittedly pretty tired even though we just woke up, but we've got too many thoughts dancing through our non-existent mind to sleep now. When we finally do get some sleep, we wake up the next morning to discover, oh my god!
Oh god. She's not gonna eat us, is she? And no, I don't mean in that way. Or do I?
We are treated to a comedic scene of Tamamo unable to hold back her rampant horniness, only to have Elizabeth walk in and ruin the moment. Tamamo punishes her for clock blocking with more slapstick, and then we move on to start our day properly. When we regroup with Archimedes, he tries to motivate Tamamo to take action against Nero by appealing to her power-hungry sensibilities, since Nero stands to oppose her complete and total rule of Seraph. She would need to defeat her to complete the regalia and have the entirety of Hakuno all to herself. We move on to the City of Lost Destiny, the Fuyuki map again, but this time around it has a new gimmick, with unclaimed sectors. You have to look for the visual distortion on the screen and whack these invisible nodes to claim the sector for your team. This makes this whole chapter basically free, because if you capture all of these neutral sectors quickly enough, you can complete the Regime Matrix without even engaging Cuckoo Lane in battle. Nero is also roaming around this map as a servant you can potentially encounter, and it's best to avoid her as well, as she's super powered at the moment. You should have this map completed in a matter of minutes, with some practice if you're quick about it. This is also one of the maps where you can unlock Artoria as well, and probably the easiest one to do so because of its simple win condition. The only challenging part about that is you might be in a situation where you have to fight Artoria and the boss servant Archer at the exact same time, which can be tricky. Archer on his own isn't too difficult, but he can nail you with some sword projections directly in front of him that are very difficult to dodge, and he doesn't exactly telegraph when he does this, so you might get blown away by exploding swords in the ground and have no way to stop it. Best not to rush him head on to avoid this attack. Also, given his namesake, he has a ranged attack with a huge AoE, so don't ever assume you're at a good enough distance from him. Mooncrux should be good enough to finish him off no problem. Tamamo's conquest of Seraph is going without a hitch. We regroup in our quarters and Tamamo seems extremely hot and bothered. Most likely wants to continue her rampantly horny shenanigans from this morning. She finally can't take it anymore and pushes us over, only for us to be interrupted by a sudden vision. A warrior woman. White hair, dark skin, red eyes. This vision with Altera is similar to the one we saw in the Flame Poem arc, but with a few distinct differences. In spite of Hakuno's gaze having Altera transfixed, she reminds us of her duty as an instrument of total destruction, and she promises to fulfill that obligation. Unlike with Nero, Tamamo actually sees Altera in this vision. She feels the overwhelming pressure being exerted from her and recognizes Altera almost. In some primordial, instinctual kind of way, she recognizes that she is an enemy of mankind. After we snap out of it, rather than being jealous and irrational like Nero, Tamamo actually holds her composure and stays focused, reassuring us that Altera is just a menace and needs to be defeated. Afterwards, we see a conversation that Hakuno is actually not present to experience, meaning that this game is technically not permanently locked into the first person. Archimedes explains that things are happening the same as last time up until now.
What does he mean by that?
Elizabeth shows up and the two of them discuss their allegiance to Tamamo, Elizabeth knowing more about Archimedes' true plot and scheme than she is letting on. The next morning, Tamamo assembles all of her troops to prepare for an all-out assault on Nero's home base. Hakuno recognizes that their victory is close, but doesn't seem convinced that this will be a complete resolution to their problems. She notes that Elizabeth was also missing during their assembly this morning. In a troublesome My Room conversation later, Tamamo brings up the incident with our vision of Altera, and not only holds that over our head, but also goes as far as to say, "On the battlefield, let me make all the decisions."
Hakuno's rationalization for this is that in spite of all the power that Tamamo has and all the responsibility to rule her kingdom, the one thing that she actually fears to lose is us, which is an endearing sentiment. I could just do without all the manipulation.
When we arrive in Nero's domain, we end up running into Elizabeth here instead. She lets us know that she's done with Tamamo and has broken her allegiance to her. She's going rogue and she will act on behalf of her own interests as her own faction from now on. She mentions that she will be as great as the Great King of Terror, and Hakuno recognizes this as a reference to Nostradamus' prediction about the world ending. As we enter combat in this section, Nero breaks out the big guns right away. Her invincible vanguard stands in our way of getting to her. Sir Gawain is absorbing the power of sunlight and giving himself a huge buff. We need to deal with him immediately. In one of the game's most unique objectives, you're tasked with aggroing Gawain and having him follow you into a sector occupied by Lu Bu so he can fight a worthy opponent. But even Lu Bu won't stand long against him. Once you have him in that sector, it's time to take over all the sectors highlighted in green on the map, 4 in total, in order to close off Gawain's access to his buffs. A major mistake I made on this map was not adjusting my equipment setup to be able to resist fire damage, as the sector traps here are primarily fire and poison, but luckily not many sectors have traps to begin with on this map. The sectors you need to take over are also unfortunately only worth 1 point. The tricky part is taking them over quickly enough so that Li Shuen doesn't kill Medusa. After taking all of these sectors, I rushed back to try to save Lu Bu, but I was just barely too late and he was defeated by Gawain. So instead of trying to take back that sector from Gawain, I opt to go save Medusa instead. Upon defeating Li Shuen and the severely weakened Gawain, you should have naturally completed the regime matrix by then. The fight against Nero isn't too difficult, but she is much faster than you and can sheep shot you easily with some fast attacks. But other than that, as long as you've saved up some healing code cast and you remember to interrupt her Noble Phantasm and stay on the defensive when she's using Mooncrux, you should be fine. When Nero is defeated, Mind Hakuno steps out to defend her, just as Soul Hakuno did for Tamamo in the Flame Poem arc. Mind Hakuno refuses to be rejoined with the Soul and abandon Nero, and it's at this moment when Tamamo loses her cool.
See, due to her perceived betrayal by Nero, Tamamo just feels like all of her accomplishments, all of her victories have just been robbed from her. That Nero is this constant thorn in her side, constantly undermining everything she does and taking everything from her. When Tamamo got her piece of the regalia, she knew that it was not rightfully hers, but she desperately clung to it because it was something for her to finally claim for herself. This moment is legitimately sympathetic towards Tamamo, and I enjoy it more than the previous scenes we've had with her.
Tamamo vengefully snatches Nero's regalia. Nero has no choice but to yield and escape with her master. Archimedes then insists we hand the regalia over to him so he can initiate the administrative updates that need to be made to fix everything. Tamamo can sense a snake in the grass. Her instincts cause her to hesitate. The two bicker back and forth until suddenly Elizabeth swoops in and snatches Nero's regalia. Surprisingly, this time around when Elizabeth tries to put it on, it actually accepts her and she's able to control it. Why that is the case, I have no idea, but she throws all of that out the window immediately by eating the ring! This finally causes it to relapse and explode. This doesn't result in Elizabeth's demise, but rather a nice new transformation for her.
He's so mad. And this is not even close to how salty Archimedes gets about Elizabeth over the course of this game. This also one of my favorite lines from Archimedes right here, because this right here sums up Elizabeth Bathory's involvement in this game as a whole. I can't take you anywhere. Corrupted Elizabeth fires off her noble phantasm and blows Archimedes away. Before she can destroy us, though, the sky above us shatters, and Altera finally makes her entrance. This scene is almost line for line the same as it is in the Flame Poem arc, with the exception that Tamamo actually somewhat recognizes Altera, and is surprised that she doesn't recognize her in return. Tamamo is once again heartbroken to see the body of Hakuno reject her, but Altera doesn't allow time for idle chatter and we're forced to retreat. After some rest, we regain our composure only to realize that Altera's forces have started taking over and destroying many of Seraph's territories. Elizabeth shows up to taunt us some more, and she reveals where she got her new power from, and how she was able to break free of Tamamo's control. The origin point of Altera, Velber, the Cosmic Devourer, the ultimate force of destruction on its 14,000-year voyage to return to Earth. The one thing the Moon Cell recognizes as a threat. Hakuno has a vision of that destructive event, 14,000 years ago. The White Titan walked the Earth, and all civilizations crumbled.
Now, it's still much too early in the story. We really don't have an explanation as to what Velber and the White Titan actually is. This singular event, the White Titan destroying all of civilization 14,000 years ago, is a very, very significant event in the Total Fate timeline, and it bleeds into Grand Order once we start getting into the Lost Bell storylines.
Much like in the Flame Poem arc, Tamamo now has to set out to stop Altera's top-class servants from destroying her territories. Our objective with this map is to stop Gilgamesh from conquering this one in particular. A superpowered Altera will be running around the map wreaking havoc, so it's best to avoid her at all costs. I made sure to actually adjust my setup before going into this one, so we have the correct codecast we need for the sector traps. The sector you spawn into the map will be crowded with nasty enemies. So as soon as you're done with that one, you run into Corroded Elizabeth, who technically isn't any more of a challenge in this form because she has the exact same moveset. But this particular encounter is in a sector with a ton of awful enemies, including poisonous archers and cube throwers. Next we stop Jean from taking one of our high-value sectors, and Altera annihilates Lu Bu during the process. I accidentally ran into Altera at one point, but I ran away from her to the final high-value sector, and thankfully she didn't follow me. I have an attack boost code cast on my current firmware, so I used that to compensate for Tamamo's low strength and completed the regime matrix. Once you do, a portal opens up to a throne room similar to where you fought Nero and Tamamo respectively, but instead of fighting Altera here, we fight Gilgamesh, which is hilarious from a character standpoint. Tamamo has a very hard time with Gilgamesh because some of his attacks just come out of nowhere thanks to how the Gate of Babylon works. Tamamo just has a hard time getting close to him to deal any damage. Some of the late game EX rank Formaware give you some pretty powerful abilities such as a free casting of the Moon Drive, so if it looks like you're going to take a death from him, it might be a good idea to use that. Gilgamesh is also the only servant other than the main three boss servants that can use his Noble Phantasm, so as per usual you want to knock that key out of his hands. Our victory against Gilgamesh doesn't appear to have pushed back Altera's forces much at all. They get ready to initiate a two-front pincer attack on the Millennium Capital. Gilgamesh's forces line up like artillery on one side, while what we can assume to be Iskander's side lines up on the other. Lu Bu sets off to engage with Iskander's forces in what we're convinced is a suicide mission. Tamamo knows that she's going to have to stop Altera now or risk losing everything, and sets her remaining servants to defend the capital at all costs. Karna has been Tamamo's charitable and honored guest throughout this conflict, and in spite of Tamamo's vanity and selfishness, he's been adamant about defending this capital in the interests of preserving its beauty and what it stands for. Medusa expresses her surprise in Tamamo's commitment to doing the right thing rather than being the one to spread chaos, saying it was most likely through the merits of Hakano keeping her anchored. The two servants say their goodbyes and set off for their final fight. We have one last opportunity to rest before we set off for the Zero Dark itself and confront Altera. Tamamo finally has a moment of self-reflection, where she laments the lack of importance she placed on protecting the moon cell and Earth. She feels like a failure and worries that Hakano will want to leave her due to her mistakes. We reassure her of how her beauty and conviction has completely enraptured us, and that we're not planning on going anywhere. We're in this together until the end.
Altera appears again in our room during this scene. She mentions that technically she's only after the regalia and not after conquering the moon cell in and of itself. Hakano rather astutely points out that there seems to be a bit of a disparity between Altera's actions and her motivations, and wonders, what is her true motivation? Who is the true Altera?
We set off for the Zero Dark. Tamamo realizes that ever since the Soul Hakano woke up, all we've done is fight and conquer, and we haven't even had time for a simple date. Staying optimistic, Tamamo excitedly shares her eager plans for what we can do together when this is all over, and they set off for the portal. This map is nearly identical to the one during the Flame Poem arc, and we deal with a lot of the same troubles. Hopefully you have memorized some of the confusing map layout now, but unfortunately, Tamamo's less intuitive and slower combat style makes this map much more challenging than with Nero. Right off the bat we run into Iskander in the sector directly in front of us. He has an attack that can cheap shot you incredibly easy with these little soldiers he sends out. But the real thing that makes this fight annoying is since it's at the very beginning of the map, you won't have any of your Extella maneuver gauge or Moondrive gauge built up. Next we go northeast to the sector to save Medusa from getting killed by Gilgamesh. He's still running around the map causing chaos just like last time. After we beat him back, Corroded Elizabeth tries to take the sector we already beat Iskander in. It's worth the backtracking though, because defeating a servant permanently takes away points from the enemy team, so I don't care that I'm not taking over a new sector by killing her. I actually lost this mission once because Medusa got her ass killed, and on the second attempt I took 2 deaths because I was rushing and didn't watch my health around the fire sector traps. Going into the Altera fight with only 1 command seal left is pucker factor over 9,000. Altera once again offers Tamamo the option of a peaceful surrender if she turns over the regalia. Hakano, noticing a distinct disconnect in Altera's actions and her perceived loyalty to the Umbral Star, starts to feel this unsettling doubt about the whole situation. Tamamo, once again focusing on herself, harshly cuts off any chance of negotiation and provokes Altera into combat. The fight itself is only made slightly more challenging by Tamamo's poor controls compared to Nero. On this difficulty you must go on the defensive when she initiates Moondrive or she will definitely kill you. Once you finish the fight, she fires off the Teardrop Photon Ray. Tamamo and Hakano implement their sleight of hand trick and deploy a digital decoy of Tamamo to take the hit of the Noble Phantasm. Then Tamamo casts her own, the Eightfold Blessing of Amaterasu, hitting Altera with full force and finally knocking her to the ground. Tamamo makes some vague references that once again indicate that she may know Altera's legend as a heroic spirit. The body of Hakano appears once again to comfort and protect Altera. Before the terms of her surrender can be established, we're interrupted by the appearance of...
I do want you guys to actually pay close attention to what Elizabeth says here, because it implies that she already knows everything about Altera, probably due to her newfound connection to the Umbral Star.
Elizabeth uses her newfound powers to initiate Altera's transformation into the White Titan. in spite of her refusal to cause more violence and destruction. And with that, just like last time, it all returns to nothing. It all comes tumbling down. Just like last time, Body Hakuno stays by the White Titan's side in spite of it slowly killing her. And it's here, when faced with this overwhelming menace, the threat of everything they have cherished being destroyed, that Tamamo finally breaks down. Tamamo acknowledges that she's been a tyrannical harlot, controlling and manipulating. She wanted to put on this harlot facade as a way of dominating and staying in control of her subjects, because she didn't want to lose us, because she didn't want to be alone. Now she is afraid, faced with the terrifying reality that through her actions and her neglect of the greater issues, she's led us both to our demise. She says completely sincerely, from the bottom of her heart, that she is sorry.
This is the arc of Tamamo's story coming full circle here at the end. Earlier I was very critical of Tamamo's actions and called her toxic, because a lot of those actions were legitimately things you should not do in a real-world relationship, but from a fictional standpoint, it is perfectly acceptable, if not necessary, for a character to be flawed. The purpose of the story is to see the arc, to see the evolution of the character over time and their peaks and valleys and highs and lows. We're along for the ride and we want to see the character change and grow. It's a nice little concise story and it really builds upon her character from Fate Extra.
We reassure Tamamo that we will be by her side no matter what, and the reason we are still here is we have an unyielding desire to continue to live by her side, and that in spite of everything, we still trust her with our lives. And with that, we head off to fight the final boss. By the way, this boss fight is exactly the same as last time, so if you use the same strategy, you'll be fine. Just as before, we see the tragic demise of the Titan Altera, her heartfelt goodbye to the body of Hakuno, and the body's acceptance of her fate. The ending of Tamamo's route is decidedly more pleasant than that of Nero's. The two of them just sort of settle down in the Millennium Capital and indulge in all the wonders and pleasures that this world has in store for them. It's wholesome if nothing else.
I know a lot of people are very die-hard fans of Tamamo, and I understand why. She's not my favorite, but she does have a lot to enjoy. Unfortunately for this game as a complete package, this is the route where a lot of people dropped the game, unfortunately due to her slower, less concise gameplay controls compared to Nero, and the fact that while it is a very nice, self-contained story about Tamamo, it's the arc that has the least to do with the grand scale of the story. I sure hope you're willing to power through it and finish it though, because we're only at the halfway point, and this game's story has not even begun to get good.
Sorry to leave this on a cliffhanger like this. When I put all this together, I had no clue I would be making nearly 3 hours of content. And I did a poll and almost everyone unanimously agreed to split this into 2 parts. It wasn't filmed or written or scripted this way at all, so I'm not particularly happy about the idea that we're splitting it into 2 parts. But trust me, the second part will have the bulk of the important bits of the story, so it's definitely worth coming back to see that second part. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.